What is more painful than being fired? It is turning on the television and watching a stranger wearing your clothes, saying your lines, and living with your family while you are left to rot. Lisa Robin Kelly was the breakout star of that '70s show, the perfectly wicked Lorie Foreman. But behind the charisma was a woman shattered by a secret miscarriage, numbing her grief with alcohol. Instead of offering help, Hollywood committed the ultimate cruelty. They erased her. They hired a new actress to take her place and pretended she never existed. From a primetime princess to a viral mugshot meme, she died in a rehab facility at 43, feeling like a ghost in her own life. This is the devastating story of the brutal truth behind Lisa Robin Kelly's final days. To truly grasp the magnitude of the negligence that killed her in 2013, we have to rewind 15 years. We have to go back to a soundstage in Studio City in 1998, where a group of unknown teenagers was trying to figure out how to be funny. Amidst the future movie stars and the heartthrobs, there was a blonde woman with a sharp chin and eyes that seemed to vibrate with a manic, dangerous intelligence. She was not the lead. She was not the love interest. She was the sister. And yet every time she opened her mouth, she threatened to burn the entire set down with the sheer heat of her talent. This is the part of the story that usually gets edited out because it makes the ending too painful to bear. Lisa Robin Kelly was likely the most gifted comedic actor on that '70s show, and the industry simply did not know what to do with her. The late 1990s was a strange transitional era for television comedy. The earnestness of The Cosby Show and Family Ties was dead, replaced by the cynicism of Seinfeld and the polished sarcasm of Friends. Into this vacuum stepped That '70s Show, a sitcom that was essentially a nostalgia machine wrapped in a smoke haze. The casting was a meticulous alchemy of archetypes: the nice guy, the rebel, the idiot, the girl next door. And then there was Lorie Foreman. On paper, the character of Lorie was a flat, misogynistic trope. She was written as the evil sister, the slut, the manipulative antagonist whose only function was to torment the protagonist and sleep around. In the hands of a mediocre actress, Lorie would have been insufferable, a one-note villain that the audience was instructed to hate. She would have been a plot device, a hurdle for Eric Foreman to jump over. But Lisa Robin Kelly refused to play the caricature. She took this thin, mean-spirited writing and injected it with a chaotic, frantic humanity that was mesmerizing to watch. She understood something about comedy that most actors never learn. The funniest people are often the most desperate. She played Lorie not as a villain, but as a survivor in a house of madness. Watch her physical performance in the first 3 seasons. It is a masterclass in kinetic acting. She is never still. She is constantly moving, fidgeting, flicking her hair, narrowing her eyes, shifting her weight. It was reminiscent of a young Goldie Hawn or a darker, twisted Lucille Ball. She brought a restlessness to the frame that made the multicam format feel dangerous. When she entered a scene, the energy shifted. You didn't know what she was going to do, and more importantly, you got the sense that she didn't know what she was going to do. This specific quality, this live wire intensity, is what separated her from her co-stars. While Ashton Kutcher was playing the lovable goofball with broad puppy dog strokes and Topher Grace was delivering dry, neurotic sarcasm, Lisa was operating on a different frequency. She was playing a high-status character who was deeply insecure, a predator who was also a victim of her own impulses. Her chemistry with Kurtwood Smith was arguably the strongest relationship in the series. It was a twisted dance of manipulation. Lorie was Daddy's little girl, but Lisa played it with a knowing, Machiavellian wink. She showed the audience the gears turning. She showed us the effort it took to maintain the facade. In doing so, she made Lorie Foreman a character designed to be loathed, strangely lovable. We rooted for her chaos because it felt more honest than the sentimental moments of the other characters. Critics at the time, the few who bothered to look past the male leads, noticed this. There were whispers that she was the breakout star. She had the timing of a sniper. She could deliver a punchline with a delay, a pause, or a look that would double the laugh count. There's a scene where she is simply eating dinner, listening to her family argue, and she does nothing but chew and dart her eyes back and forth. It is hilarious. It is a testament to the fact that she didn't need lines to command the screen. She just needed to be in the room. This is the definition of star power, the gravitational pull that draws the eye to you even when you are standing in the background. However, the ecosystem of Hollywood in the turn of the millennium was not designed to nurture a talent like hers. It was a boys' club. The marketing machine of that 70s show quickly coalesced around the male stars. They were the ones getting the movie deals. They were the ones being groomed for longevity. Lisa was, in the eyes of the executives, an accessory, a difficult woman playing a difficult woman. The industry has a long, brutal history of conflating an actress's character with her real-life persona. And because Lorie was crazy and promiscuous, it was easy for the producers and the public to assume Lisa was too. This lack of distinction is the first crack in the foundation. It allowed the production to treat her as disposable. When a male genius is erratic, he is eccentric or method. When a female genius is erratic, she is a liability. We must also consider the comedic archetypes available to women at the time. You could be the nagging wife, the sexy lamp, or the manic pixie dream girl. Lisa didn't fit any of these boxes. She was aggressive. She was sexual but not submissive. She was mean. She was funny in a way that was abrasive and confrontational. Hollywood didn't have a roadmap for a woman who was both a sex symbol and a clown. They didn't know how to market her, so they didn't. They let her float in the ether, unsupported, while the machine pushed Kutcher and Grace toward stardom. This professional isolation is a critical component of her psychological decline. Imagine knowing you are the funniest person in the room, hearing the audience laughter that proves it, but seeing the opportunities go to the people standing next to you. It creates a dissonance. It feeds the imposter syndrome. It whispers that maybe you aren't talented. Maybe you are just lucky to be there. The tragedy of her underrated status is that it left her without a safety net. A star who is considered a national treasure gets protected. When Robert Downey Jr. stumbled, the industry paused, waited, and helped him up because they knew his value. When Lisa Robin Kelly began to stumble, the industry looked at her and saw a replaceable part. They didn't see a genius in crisis. They saw a broken sitcom actress who could be swapped out for a blonde look-alike. The nuance of her performance, the specific idiosyncratic rhythm she built for Lorie, was undervalued. The producers believed the character was the asset, not the actress. They were wrong. When they eventually replaced her in season 6, the character died. The new actress hit the marks and said the lines, but the danger was gone. The soul was gone. It proved too late that Lisa was the engine. But in those early seasons, before the darkness fully encroached, she was incandescent. There are outtakes and bloopers where you can see the cast-breaking character laughing uncontrollably at something she did. In those moments, you see the real Lisa, bright, quick-witted, infectious. She was a comedic sniper. She could find the rhythm of a scene and disrupt it in the most delightful way. She used her voice like a weapon, pitching it up to a shrill whine or dropping it to a deadpan drawl. She used her body as a prop. She was fearless. Comedy requires a lack of vanity. You have to be willing to look ugly, to look desperate, to look foolish. Lisa had that fearlessness. She threw herself into the physical comedy with a reckless abandon that resulted in some of the show's most iconic moments. It is haunting to watch those scenes now. We are watching a woman dancing on the edge of a cliff. The frantic energy we interpreted as acting was likely the bleeding edge of her own anxiety. The desperation she infused into Lorie was drawing from a deep well of personal insecurity. She was channeling her own fragility into the work, transmuting her pain into gold for the network. And the network took the gold, cashed the checks, and ignored the miner who was suffocating in the dark. We often talk about wasted potential in the abstract, but with Lisa Robin Kelly, the waste is quantifiable. We lost decades of performances. She could have been a queen of dark comedy. She could have transitioned into indie films, playing complex, broken women with that signature wit. She had the range of a Parker Posey or a Natasha Lyonne. She had the grit. But talent is not enough in a system designed to extract value and discard the husk. Talent requires cultivation. It requires protection. Lisa had neither. She was a Ferrari engine put inside a go-kart, driven at maximum speed until the wheels came off, and then blamed for crashing. Trauma does not always enter a life with a screech of tires or the flash of a camera bulb. In the forensic reconstruction of a human spirit, we often find that the fatal blow was struck in a moment of absolute, terrifying quiet. For Lisa Robin Kelly, the disintegration of her life did not begin in a jail cell or a rehab facility. It began in the sterile silence of a doctor's office and in the lonely, echoing bathroom of her own home. If we are to understand why a brilliant woman would slowly drink herself to death over the course of a decade, we must pinpoint the moment the pain became too great to bear sober. That moment was the loss of her child. The miscarriage is the ghost in the machine of Lisa Robin Kelly's biography. It is the detail that is frequently footnoted, glossed over, or mentioned as a minor sad event in a long list of troubles. But this minimization is a form of violence in itself. To dismiss the psychological devastation of a miscarriage, especially for a woman with Lisa's specific emotional architecture, is to miss the entire motive for her self-destruction. We must look at this event not just as a medical misfortune, but as a psychic amputation. Consider the timeline. The show was hitting its stride. The ratings were climbing. Lisa was, to the outside world, living the dream. She was young, rich, and famous. But internally, she was preparing for a role that had nothing to do with Hollywood, motherhood. For a woman navigating the shark-infested waters of the entertainment industry, a pregnancy is often viewed as a liability, a scheduling conflict, a breach of contract. But for Lisa, it represented something else entirely. It represented an anchor. In the chaos of 14-hour shoot days and the superficiality of red carpet events, a child offers a connection to something real, something permanent, something that loves you not because you are funny or thin, but simply because you exist. It was a chance to build the family she perhaps felt she was missing, a chance to pour that frantic, intense love she possessed into a vessel that wouldn't break. When that pregnancy ended, it didn't just end a biological process, it ended a future. The physical trauma of a miscarriage is harrowing enough, the pain, the blood, the sudden, violent emptiness of the body. But the emotional trauma is a unique kind of hell. It is a grief that has no grave. There is no funeral. There is no obituary. There is no public ritual of mourning. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, the conversation around pregnancy loss was shrouded in a thick, suffocating stigma. It was considered a women's issue, something to be dealt with privately, quietly, and quickly. You were expected to get over it. You were expected to try again. The industry did not pause for grief. There was no bereavement leave for a life that technically hadn't started. And here lies the crux of the horror. The show must go on. This is the golden rule of Hollywood, a rule written in the ink of profit margins and air dates. When Lisa lost her baby, the machine of that 70s show did not stop grinding. The writers didn't scrap the scripts. The lighting crew didn't go home. The audience didn't stop waiting for their laughs. Lisa was required to return to work. She was required to put on the polyester pants, the makeup, and the mask of Lorie Foreman. She was required to be the fun slut. Think about the cruelty of that specific character archetype in relation to her loss. She was playing a character defined by sexual promiscuity and a lack of consequences, while in her real life she was suffering the ultimate consequence of her biology. She had to flirt, she had to sneer, she had to bounce around the set with that signature energy, all while her body was literally and metaphorically weeping. This forced dissociation, the splitting of the self into the performer and the griever, is the mechanism that broke her mind. Human beings are not designed to compartmentalize pain of that magnitude for 12 hours a day. When you force a person to suppress a scream for too long, the scream turns inward. It begins to echo in the chambers of the psyche, shattering everything it touches. Lisa was walking onto a bright, colorful set, surrounded by laughter, while carrying a corpse in her heart. The dissonance between her internal reality and her external reality created a friction that was unbearable. She needed a way to bridge the gap. She needed a way to turn down the volume of the grief so she could hear her cues. Enter alcohol. We must stop looking at Lisa's alcoholism as a hedonistic pursuit. The tabloid narrative that she was a party girl who loved the nightlife is a lie. Lisa didn't drink to party. She drank to survive the workday. Alcohol is the world's most efficient, legal, and accessible anesthetic. It works fast. It blurs the sharp edges of reality. It creates a warm, fuzzy barrier between the soul and the world. For Lisa, a drink wasn't about getting high. It was about getting numb. It was about lowering the crushing weight of the sadness just enough to stand up. It was a chemical crutch used to support a broken leg that everyone else was pretending wasn't broken. The slide from social drinking to medicinal drinking is subtle and insidious. It starts with a glass of wine to wind down after a taping, to stop the mind from racing about the baby she lost. Then it becomes 2 glasses to sleep. Then it becomes a drink before the taping to calm the nerves, to steady the shaking hands, to artificially manufacture the bubbly personality that everyone expected. Alcohol mimics the effects of the neurotransmitters that her brain was no longer producing naturally. It gave her a synthetic dopamine hit when her own joy had evaporated. It was a transaction. She traded her long-term health for short-term functionality. She sold her liver to buy a few hours of peace, but the industry that demanded this functionality offered no support to maintain it naturally. Where were the on-set therapists? Where were the producers checking in on her mental state? In the corporate structure of a television network, an actor is an asset, like a camera or a set piece. If a camera breaks, you fix it. If an actor breaks, you wonder why they are being difficult. The stigma of mental health issues, especially for women, was absolute. If Lisa had walked into the producer's office and said, "I am depressed because I lost my baby and I can't be funny today," she would have been labeled unstable. She would have been seen as a risk. The fear of being replaced, a fear that later proved entirely justified, kept her silent. She hid the grief behind the bottle because the bottle was the only thing that didn't judge her. This secrecy is a fertilizer, for addiction. Shame grows in the dark. Lisa was ashamed of her loss, ashamed of her sadness, and ashamed of her drinking. This triple-layered shame created a fortress of solitude around her. She was surrounded by castmates, crew, and fans, yet she was utterly, devastatingly alone. The loneliness of the functioning alcoholic is a specific kind of torture. You are performing a pantomime of normalcy while you are slowly drowning in plain sight. You are waiting for someone to notice, but you are terrified that they will. As the drinking escalated, the inevitable behavioral changes began to manifest. This is the breaking point turning into the breakdown. Alcohol, while numbing the pain, also erodes executive function. It creates volatility. It messes with sleep cycles, leading to chronic exhaustion. Lisa began to arrive late. She began to look tired. The spark in her eyes, that manic intelligence we discussed in the first chapter, began to dull. It was replaced by a glassy, unfocused look. Her timing slipped. The comedic sniper was missing her targets. The reaction from the show's leadership was not compassion. It was irritation. In the high-stakes, high-budget world of network TV, time is money. A late actor costs thousands of dollars a minute. A hungover actor ruins takes. Lisa ceased to be the genius sister and became the problem child. The whispers started. She's a mess. She's ungrateful. She's partying too much. They viewed her symptoms through the lens of morality rather than pathology. They didn't see a woman grieving a miscarriage. They saw a woman who lacked discipline. This misinterpretation is the systemic failure in its purest form. They punish the symptom while completely ignoring the disease. It is painful to imagine the feedback loop this created. Lisa sensed the annoyance of her colleagues. She felt the coldness on set. This rejection compounded her grief. Now, not only had she lost her child, but she was in danger of losing her family on set. The anxiety skyrocketed. To cope with the anxiety of losing her job, she drank more. The drinking made her performance worse. The worse performance made her job security more precarious. It was a death spiral. She was trapped in a centrifugal force that was pulling her apart, and the only tool she had to slow it down was the very thing that was speeding it up. We must also acknowledge the gender dynamics at play. Had a male star on the show suffered a personal tragedy and turned to substance abuse, the narrative might have been different. We have seen time and again how Hollywood rallies around its troubled bad boys, offering them rehab stints, hiatuses, and redemption arcs. But Lorie Foreman was a bad girl character, and Lisa was becoming a bad girl in reality. Society has little patience for messy women. A drunk man is often seen as a rogue or a tragic figure. A drunk woman is seen as sloppy and disgraceful. The misogyny of the era meant that Lisa's struggle was viewed with disgust rather than empathy. She was failing in her duty to be the perfect, pretty, low-maintenance starlet. By the end of the third season, the cracks were no longer hairline fractures. They were gaping chasms. The breaking point had occurred. The woman who had burst onto the screen with such vitality was now a shell, hollowed out by grief and filled with vodka. She had managed to keep the secret of the miscarriage from the public, but she couldn't hide the wreckage it left behind. The sad irony is that in trying to numb the pain to keep her job, she destroyed her ability to do the job. She sacrificed herself for the show, and the show was getting ready to cut her loose. The drinking that started as a way to stay Lorie eventually killed Lorie. It was a tragic, self-fulfilling prophecy. Lisa Robin Kelly didn't want to die. She didn't want to be an addict. She wanted to be a mother, and she wanted to be an actress. When the first dream died in that doctor's office, the second dream began to rot. The alcohol was just the embalming fluid. In the brutal calculus of television production, a human being is reduced to a line item on a call sheet. You are number 1, number 2, or number 3. You are an asset with a depreciating value. And when that asset begins to malfunction, when it starts showing up late, missing cues, or carrying the visible weight of a personal hell, the machine does not attempt to repair it. It replaces it. The erasure of Lisa Robin Kelly from the cultural consciousness was not an accident. It was a deliberate corporate execution. It was a slow-motion vanishing act performed in front of millions of viewers, designed to gaslight the audience into believing that the woman they loved was never really there at all. By the end of the 3rd season of that 70s show, the ecosystem on set had become toxic for Lisa. The breaking point discussed in the previous chapter had morphed into a full-blown crisis. She was visibly unwell. The sharp, angular beauty that defined Lorie Foreman was softening into the puffy, glassy-eyed look of chronic alcoholism. Her timing, once a razor, was now a blunt instrument. But instead of an intervention, instead of a hiatus with pay and medical support, the network opted for a strategy of containment. They began to write her out. This is the first stage of the erasure minimization. It is a subtle psychological warfare. You don't fire the actor immediately. You make them irrelevant. You cut their lines. You reduce their screen time. You stop giving them A-plots and relegate them to the background of scenes, holding a drink and reacting to the main action. For an actor of Lisa's caliber, who thrived on being the center of the chaotic energy, this marginalization was suffocating. It fed her insecurity. It confirmed the voice in her head, amplified by the alcohol, that whispered she was worthless. She watched as the storylines that could have been hers were given to others. She watched as the show moved on without her, even while she was still standing on the set. Then came the official departure. Lisa left the show halfway through the 3rd season. The public relations spin machine went into overdrive. The official statement was vague. Personal reasons. It is the classic Hollywood euphemism for we have a problem we don't want to talk about. By refusing to name the issue addiction, grief, mental health, the show protected its brand but abandoned its star. They denied her the dignity of the truth. Had they said, Lisa is struggling with health issues and we support her recovery, it might have changed the narrative. It might have garnered sympathy. Instead, the silence allowed the tabloids to fill in the blanks with their own cruel fiction. Lisa became the mystery, the flake, the train wreck. But the true cruelty, the act that solidified her erasure, came later. It came in season 6. Imagine the psychological violence of replacement. It is a trope in soap operas to swap actors, usually announced with a voiceover. The role of X is now being played by Y. But in a primetime sitcom where chemistry is everything, recasting a core character is a nuclear option. When the producers decided to bring back the character of Lorie Foreman, they didn't call Lisa. They hired Christina Moore. Christina Moore is a fine actress, but she was not Lorie Foreman. She was a placeholder. She was a blonde woman put in the same costumes, given the same blocking, and told to mimic the mannerisms of a genius. Watching those episodes now is an uncanny valley experience. It feels wrong. It feels like a glitch in the Matrix. But the intent behind this casting was clear. The character matters more than the human. The producers were sending a message to Lisa and to the industry. You are replaceable. Your talent was not special. Your contribution was nothing more than a wig and a catchphrase. For Lisa, seeing another woman wearing her clothes, flirting with her on-screen brother's friends, and sitting at her on-screen family's dinner table must have been a devastation beyond words. It is a form of identity theft sanctioned by a corporation. It erased her ownership of the role. It told the world that Lorie Foreman was just a suit that anyone could wear. This is the ultimate devaluation of an artist. It stripped her of her legacy while she was still alive. It turned her hard work, her nuances, her specific comedic choices into a generic template. The audience, to their credit, rejected it. The new Lorie didn't work. The chemistry was dead. The spark was gone. It proved definitively that Lisa was the magic ingredient. But the damage to Lisa's psyche was already done. The show had moved on. They had successfully scrubbed her from the family portrait. When the series finally ended and the retrospective specials aired and the cast reunions began to happen, Lisa was notably absent. She was the ghost at the feast. The family that the show promoted, the camaraderie of Kutcher, Grace, Prepon, and Valderrama, was a closed circle, and Lisa was locked out. This professional exile coincided with a public shaming that was relentless. The media in the mid-2000s was a blood sport. This was the era of Britney Spears' breakdown, of Lindsay Lohan's arrests, of Amy Winehouse's struggle. The paparazzi hunted vulnerable women for sport. Lisa became a target. As her addiction deepened and her behavior became more erratic, she provided endless fodder for the blogs. The mugshot era began. Each time Lisa was arrested, and there were several arrests for DUIs, for domestic disturbances, it was a field day for TMZ. They didn't publish the photos with a caption about the tragedy of addiction. They published them with snark. They invited the public to gawk. Look at how old she looks. Look at her hair. Look at her eyes. They turned a medical crisis into a freak show. The before and after galleries were particularly vicious. They would place a glowing airbrushed promo photo of Lorie Foreman next to a stark, unflattering police booking photo of Lisa Robin Kelly. The subtext was clear. Look at what a failure she is. This public humiliation served a specific function in her erasure. It delegitimized her past success. It made it difficult for people to remember her as the talented actress. They could only see the mess. It rewrote her history. She wasn't Lisa Robin Kelly, comedic genius. She was Lisa Robin Kelly, the cautionary tale. The shame of these photos likely drove her deeper into isolation. How do you walk into an audition room when the casting director has seen your mugshot on the front page of a gossip site that morning? How do you ask for a second chance when the world is laughing at your lowest moment? The industry blacklisted her. The phone stopped ringing. Agents dropped her. She became radioactive. This is the soft death of a career. It's not a single rejection. It's the silence. It's the realization that you have been excommunicated from the only church you ever believed in. For a woman who defined herself by her work, who poured her grief into her performance, being cut off from the craft was a death sentence. It left her with nothing but the addiction. The alcohol was no longer a tool to help her work. It became her only companion in the void. We must also look at the gendered nature of this erasure. Hollywood has a long history of rehabilitating troubled men. Robert Downey Jr. went to prison and came back as Iron Man. Charlie Sheen had public meltdowns and was given more sitcoms. Men are allowed to have demons. Their demons are seen as part of their complexity. Women are expected to be perfect. When a woman breaks, she is discarded. Lisa was not offered a redemption arc. She was not offered a comeback role. She was treated as damaged goods that had expired. The cruelty extended to the financial side. Residuals, the checks actors get when reruns air, are a lifeline. But as the show distanced itself from her, and as her character was minimized in the syndication packages, her economic power dwindled. She was being erased from the payroll as well as the screen. This financial instability made her vulnerable to the predatory relationships that would follow in the next chapter. A wealthy, powerful woman can protect herself. A broke, blacklisted, addicted woman is prey. By 2010, the erasure was nearly complete. A generation of kids was watching that 70s show reruns on Nick at Night, laughing at Lorie Foreman, completely unaware that the woman playing her was fighting for her life in a darkened house in North Carolina. The disconnect was absolute. The image of Lorie was immortal, frozen in 1978, forever young, forever bitchy, forever funny. The reality of Lisa was crumbling. The system had successfully separated the product from the person. They kept the asset and threw away the liability. When the spotlight is turned off, the darkness that follows is not empty. It is inhabited. In the ecosystem of human vulnerability, there exists a specific class of predator that thrives in the shadows cast by fallen stars. These are not the studio executives or the cruel casting directors who discard talent when it ceases to be profitable. These are the individuals who wait at the bottom of the cliff to scavenge what remains. By 2010, Lisa Robin Kelly had been effectively exiled from the professional world that had once protected her. She was isolated, she was addicted, and she was financially fragile. In the brutal logic of victimization, she had become the perfect target. The erasure discussed in the previous chapter stripped her of her defenses, leaving her exposed to a danger far more immediate and visceral than bad reviews, the danger of coercive control. It is a common misconception that abusive relationships begin with violence. They do not. They begin with rescue. When a person is drowning, as Lisa was, they will grab onto anything that looks like a raft. Enter Robert Gilliam. Nearly 20 years her senior, Gilliam was not a part of the Hollywood machinery. He was an outsider, and to a woman who had been chewed up and spat out by the industry that likely felt safe, it likely felt like an escape, but the dynamic that formed between them was not a partnership. It was a siege. We must look at this marriage not as a romantic tragedy, but as a case study in the pathology of domestic abuse. The predator identifies the wound. In Lisa's case, the profound abandonment she felt from her career and the grief of her miscarriage, and offers themselves as the cure. They isolate the victim, slowly cutting off the few remaining lifelines until the victim's reality is entirely defined by the abuser. The marriage to Gilliam was the final bolt in the cage. He moved her away from the familiar rhythms of Los Angeles to North Carolina, physically distancing her from her family and any remaining friends who might have intervened. Isolation is the abuser's most potent weapon. In a new state, without a job, without a support system, Lisa's world shrank to the size of her house. And inside that house, the war began. The police reports from their time together paint a harrowing picture of constant volatility. Neighbors reported screaming. Patrol cars were frequent visitors. But here, the forensic lens reveals a failure of the justice system that is maddeningly common. When police arrived at the Gilliam residence, they often found two intoxicated people. In the eyes of the law, this was mutual combat. They saw a messy, drunk celebrity and her husband. They didn't see the power imbalance. They didn't see the financial coercion. They arrested both, or they arrested Lisa, failing to recognize that her aggression was likely a frantic defensive reaction to prolonged psychological terror. This period birthed the images that would become Lisa's defining legacy in the eyes of the internet, the mugshots. We need to stop and really look at these photographs. We need to look at them not as memes, but as crime scene evidence. The most infamous one, taken in 2012, shows Lisa with wild bleached hair, her eyes wide and staring, her expression a rictus of panic. The internet captioned this image with cruel jokes about meth. They labeled her a junkie. They placed her picture next to the Faces of Meth campaigns. But Lisa vehemently denied using methamphetamine, and there is no public toxicology evidence to support the claim that she was a long-term user. What we are seeing in that photo is not necessarily the face of a meth addict. It is the face of a woman in a state of extreme cortisol flooding. It is the face of a woman who has not slept in days because she is terrified. It is the face of a woman who is being hunted in her own home. The meth narrative was a convenient lie that allowed the public to dehumanize her. It is easier to laugh at a tweaker than to weep for a battered woman. The physical wasting away that people pointed to, the gaunt cheeks, the skeletal frame, is entirely consistent with end-stage alcoholism and severe malnutrition caused by stress. Alcohol, when consumed in the quantities Lisa was drinking to survive her reality, destroys the body's ability to absorb nutrients. She was starving to death. She was being consumed from the inside by the chemical and from the outside by the toxicity of her marriage. The crazy eyes were not a symptom of a drug high. They were the biological marker of a nervous system that had been stuck in fight or flight mode for years. She looked like a trapped animal because she was one. The abuse was not just physical, it was financial. This is a critical component of the toxic trap. Lisa still had money coming in, residuals from that 70s show, assets from her earlier career. According to allegations made by her family and later revealed in court documents, Gilliam sought to control this flow of capital. He allegedly demanded money from her, using intimidation to drain her resources. This is economic abuse, a tactic designed to render the victim incapable of leaving. If you control the money, you control the exit. Lisa was trapped in a cycle where she had to buy her own safety, paying for peace that never lasted. The mug shots where she looks the most disheveled often followed disputes over money. In one booking report, she explicitly told officers that Gilliam had assaulted her because he wanted cash. The system wrote it down, took her photo, and released her back into his custody. The media's role in this chapter is one of abject complicity. Sites like TMZ and Perez Hilton feasted on her decline. They didn't just report the arrests, they framed them as entertainment. They created a watch party for her self-destruction. This public mockery served to further isolate her. Imagine trying to leave an abusive husband when the entire world is calling you a psycho. Imagine trying to get sober when millions of strangers are betting on your next relapse. The shame was a heavy blanket that suffocated her agency. It reinforced the abuser's narrative. Look at you. You're a mess. No one else wants you. You're lucky I put up with you. The world was laughing at her, and in doing so, they were validating the man who was hurting her. By 2013, the situation had become terminal. The toxic trap was closing tight. The alcohol consumption had escalated to lethal levels because the pain was lethal. But even in this abyss, there was a flicker of the fighter she used to be. In the summer of 2013, Lisa Robin Kelly made a decision. She decided to run. She filed for divorce. She obtained a restraining order against Robert Gilliam. We must pause to appreciate the colossal bravery of this act. For a woman in her physical condition, frail, sick, addicted, to stand up to her abuser and involve the legal system is a Herculean effort. It was a sign that the spark wasn't dead. She wanted to live. She wanted to be free. But the statistics of domestic violence tell us a grim truth. The most dangerous time for a victim is the moment they leave. When the abuser realizes they are losing control, the danger escalates. And for the victim, the psychological fallout of the separation is crushing. Lisa was free from the house, but she wasn't free from the trauma. She was staying with a new boyfriend, trying to navigate the wreckage of her life, but the demons were screaming louder than ever. The restraining order was a piece of paper. It couldn't stop the memories, it couldn't stop the fear, and it couldn't stop the withdrawal. The relapse that killed her was triggered by this specific stress. She wasn't partying. She was self-medicating the terror of the divorce. She was trying to numb the fear of retaliation. She was drinking to quiet the noise of a life that had become a horror movie. When she was brought to the hospital and later to the rehab facility in those final days, she wasn't just a drunk celebrity. She was a refugee fleeing a war zone. Her body was battered, her mind was fractured, and her spirit was exhausted. We have arrived at the final location. It is not a sound stage in Studio City, and it is not a chaotic house in North Carolina. It is a nondescript building in Altadena, California, a place that sold itself as a sanctuary but functioned as a tomb. To understand the death of Lisa Robin Kelly, we must strip away the euphemisms of passing away or losing a battle. We must look at the specific mechanical failures of the last 48 hours of her life with the cold, unblinking eye of a coroner. The facility was called Pax House. The name implies peace. It implies safety. But for a woman entering the terminal phase of alcohol withdrawal with a blood alcohol concentration that would fell a large man, peace was the one thing that could kill her. What she needed was not a bed. She needed a crash cart. What she needed was not a counselor. She needed a trauma team. The fact that she received the former and not the latter is not an accident of fate. It is a damning indictment of the for-profit recovery industrial complex that treats human lives as billable hours. On Monday, August 12, 2013, Lisa was driven to Pax House by her boyfriend. She was in a state of catastrophic physical distress. The toxicology reports that would later emerge paint a terrifying biological picture. Her blood alcohol content was 0.34. We need to pause and process that number. In the world of forensic medicine, a 0.08 is legally drunk. A 0.20 is severe intoxication involving loss of motor control and blackouts. A 0.34 is not just drunk. It is the threshold of surgical anesthesia. It is a level of toxicity where the central nervous system begins to shut down. The brain stem, which controls automatic functions like breathing and heart rate, starts to falter. At 0.34, a person is technically dying. If you or I walked into a legitimate emergency room with a 0.34 BAC, we would be prioritized immediately. We would likely be intubated to protect our airway. We would be hooked up to ECG monitors to watch for cardiac arrhythmia. We would be surrounded by doctors. But Lisa Robin Kelly did not walk into an ER. She walked, or perhaps was carried, into a residential rehab facility. And this is where the crime begins. The intake protocols of any licensed facility are supposed to be the first line of defense. They are the gatekeepers. When a patient presents with a BAC that high, the standard of care, the only acceptable standard of care, is to refuse admission and call an ambulance. You do not detox a 0.34 on a bunk bed. It is physically impossible to do so safely without intravenous medication and constant cardiac monitoring. Yet Pax House opened its doors. They took her in. They accepted the liability. Why? The answer, buried in the subtext of the wrongful death lawsuit filed later by her estate, points to the oldest motive in history: revenue. An empty bed makes no money. A diverted patient is a lost fee. In the ruthless economy of addiction treatment, the pressure to fill beds often overrides medical prudence. They looked at a dying woman and saw a customer. Once the doors closed behind her, the sanctuary became a cell. Lisa was not placed in an intensive care unit. She was placed in a room that was fundamentally ill-equipped for her acuity. The lawsuit alleged that the facility was negligent in its hiring and training, staffing the center with individuals who were not qualified to handle a medical emergency of this magnitude. This is a terrifying reality of the rehab industry. The person watching over your loved one at 3 a.m. might not be a nurse. They might be a tech with a high school diploma and a few hours of certification, earning little more than minimum wage. They are not trained to recognize the subtle shift from sleeping to comatose. They are not trained to hear the difference between a snore and the death rattle of respiratory failure. Lisa was left in the care of a system that was structurally designed to fail her. The next 48 hours were a descent into hell. Alcohol withdrawal is unique among drug withdrawals. If you quit heroin cold turkey, you will wish you were dead, you will vomit, you will ache, but you will likely survive. Alcohol is different. Alcohol withdrawal can kill you. It causes a condition known as delirium tremens, a violent electrical storm in the brain. It causes hallucinations, seizures, skyrocketing blood pressure, and cardiac arrhythmia. The body, deprived of the sedative it has become dependent on, rebounds into a state of hyperexcitability. The heart beats so fast it simply gives out. This is why medical detox exists. It uses benzodiazepines to taper the brain down gently. Lisa was allegedly denied this standard of care. She was left to white-knuckle a chemical storm that was tearing her organs apart. Wednesday, August 14th. The sun rose and set. Lisa was still alive, but barely. Her body was fighting a losing war. The electrolytes in her blood were likely haywire. Her heart, weakened by years of stress and malnutrition, was being pushed to its limit. She was vomiting. She was trembling. These are the red flashing lights of a medical emergency. Yet, no ambulance was called. No transfer to a hospital was initiated. She was kept inside the facility. The negligence here is not passive, it is active. Every hour that passed without medical intervention was a choice. It was a choice to gamble with her life. The facility was betting that she would stabilize, that they could handle it, that they wouldn't have to explain why they admitted a .34 BAC patient to the authorities. They bet wrong. The night fell. The darkness in the room was absolute. Sometime in the deepest part of the night, or the early gray of the morning of Thursday, August 15th, the fight ended. It wasn't cinematic. There were no final words. There was just a heart that beat one last erratic time and then stopped. The silence that she had run from her entire life, the silence of the empty nursery, the silence of the phone that didn't ring, finally caught her. She stopped breathing. And because she was not on a cardiac monitor, because there was no nurse watching a screen, nobody knew. She lay dead in a facility paid to keep her alive. The window for rescue, the golden hour, where CPR and epinephrine could have restarted her heart, opened and closed without anyone noticing. When the staff finally checked on her shortly after 8 a.m., the scene was one of futile chaos. They found her unresponsive. They called 911. The recording of that call is a document of panic and failure. The paramedics arrived. They tried. But rigor mortis and pooling blood tell a story that no CPR can rewrite. Lisa Robin Kelly was pronounced dead at the scene. The official cause of death would later be ruled as multiple drug intoxication, a label that conveniently spreads the blame to the pills in her system, masking the primary driver, the catastrophic withdrawal, and the lack of medical oversight. The coroner's report lists the chemicals, but it doesn't list the negligence. It doesn't list the fact that a hospital transfer on Monday would have almost certainly saved her life. The aftermath was a predictable exercise in damage control. Pack's house and the individuals involved lawyered up. The narrative of she was just too sick began to circulate. But Lisa's family fought back. Her estate filed a wrongful death lawsuit, laying out the timeline of negligence we have just examined. They alleged that the facility was ill-equipped and that the delay in calling 911 was a fatal error. The lawsuit was eventually settled, a quiet ending to a loud tragedy. In the legal world, a settlement is not an admission of guilt, but it is an acknowledgement of risk. It is a payment made to make the questions go away. The brutal truth is that Lisa's life was priced out, negotiated, and closed. The media coverage of her death was the final insult. The headlines screamed rehab death and OD. The mugshots were run again. The comment sections were filled with the predictable vitriol. What a waste. She did it to herself. The world shrugged. To them, she was just another starlet who couldn't handle her liquor. They didn't see the crime scene. They didn't see the systemic failure. They didn't see the woman who had been failed by Hollywood, failed by the police, failed by her husband, and finally failed by the doctors. So, what is the legacy of Lisa Robin Kelly? It is not the sitcom episodes that run in syndication where she is forever young and laughing. It is the silence of that room in Altadena. Her death serves as a grim warning about the reality of the recovery industry, a sector that is often unregulated and predatory. It serves as a reminder that celebrity is not a shield. In fact, it can be a target. It exposes the lethality of the stigma that surrounds addiction and mental health. Because she was Lorie Foreman, because she was messy, she was deemed unworthy of the urgent care that would have been given to a stranger.